The European Union is a slow and not very effective negotiator of free trade agreements. We keep hearing about their negotiating power, their size. Actually, the fact that they represent 28 different countries means they come up with suboptimal outcomes all the time. And actually, we're the country that does least well out of the European Union's free trade agreements. They almost never involve services, for example, our primary trade. So the EU is slow, it's not very effective negotiator of trade deals. But we will be smaller, of course, but many, many countries that are smaller than us do very, very good trade deals. Switzerland's a very obvious example, and it's much more effective than ours. We're bigger, remember, by the way, when we talk about how small we are, we're bigger than the bottom 18 European countries put together. So we're not small by any normal measure of the word. We also have huge advantages over and above our economic weight. We have the English language, we have English law, we're leaders in life sciences, artificial intelligence, internet, medicine, a whole series of areas. And we are one of the leading countries in terms of intellectual exports. Services encompasses intellectual exports. And in that, the English language is the most powerful weapon possible. Yeah. So what this proposal would do is try and deal with a problem which is less bad than they think, and in doing so, throw away a power, throw away a right, which is incredibly important, much, much more important than they think. They are trying to defend a false past and giving up a real future. There we go. Yeah. WTO is a walk-away. That's the problem. It's a walk-away. It's an outcome that you don't want, but it's what you've got to have there in order to have a proper negotiation. And it's a hard fact we have to face. It's a walk-away. We all think that we're going to suffer most from a WTO outcome. This is simply not the case. There is an asymmetric arrangement here. We have a floating power. In fact, I'm quoting the German chief economist of Deutsche Bank here. We have a floating pound. That's what protected us so far in the last 2 years, the movement of the pound. And it will protect us again. We have unilateral capability which nobody else in Europe will have. Nobody else in Europe will have the ability to change our taxes and our regulations to make sure that we get the FDI that the Honourable Gentleman was talking about. And finally, of course, we have the upside of the other free trade agreements. And that's why another reason I'm sorry that the Chancellor's here. Because one of the big differences between him and me is he does not believe free trade agreements deliver a large economic bang for their buck. Well, I have to say, if you look at the last 30 years of world history, there are billions of people in the world who might just take a different view on that. Now, the second thing, the second option that I would like to talk to briefly was the Norway option. Now, the Norway option I looked at very carefully. Indeed, I got castigated by my own side for paying too much attention to the Norway option. But I thought it's very, very important that we ensure that every single possible option is explored well. And I was approached and talked at great length by my honourable friend, the member for Grantham and Stamford. And Norway Norway Plus appeared to have three actual virtues to it, as their protagonists say. First was it's the easiest negotiation, they thought, the simplest. It's the smallest movement and therefore the simplest negotiation. Secondly, it meets the conditions of referendum, they say. And thirdly, it's the softest of soft Brexits. All possibly good arguments, except they're not true. The negotiation, it's not simple. We can't simply just stay in the EEA. That doesn't work. Jean-Claude Pires, the ex-head of the EU Legal Service, said in terms we'll have to renegotiate every single clause of EEA arrangement. It will require unanimity from 30 different members, and they are going to exact a price. Now, one of the advantages of Norway, you would think, is we control our own fisheries policy. But are we going to get that with a vote from Denmark, and a vote from France, and a vote from Spain? No, we're not. That's one of the problems in this. The negotiation hurdles are very big. It's cited that Michel Barnier said this was a possible outcome, only in conjunction with customs union membership. The two together, we are locked. We are basically in a worse position than the government's proposal. We're basically locked into the single market, no say, no control, but in every other respect, including free movement of peoples and paying money, we will be locked there. Norway does not find it satisfactory. politically, frankly, a country like ours certainly should not. So that doesn't work. Finally, it delivers on the result of the referendum. No, it doesn't. Free movement, money, independent trade policy, jurisdiction of supranational courts, rule taker, on all of those we fail under Norway. So what's left? The last thing that's left is the free trade agreement. Now, I have long thought this was the best option. This is the one that's been called Canada Plus Plus Plus, it's been called Super Canada, and a variety of other names. And somewhere buried in the middle of Dexu, in the middle of my old department, there is a piece of paper, well, actually, watch that thick, laying out how this can be done in detail, including some legal text. The concept is simple, and that's important in this context, because we're going to have a very limited time in the last few months to negotiate this. And this is the point I made when, a couple of years ago when I was making this argument. This is the 3 months that matter. The European Union always takes the negotiation down to the wire. Always. The last hour, the last day, the last hour, the last minute, the last second. Sometimes it stops the clock to allow the negotiations to conclude. And that's what's going to happen here, I suspect. I suspect we're going to go right deep into time on this. So why was this attractive? It was attractive because we could build it from precedents. Canada is an EU-negotiated precedent. And you could add to it, the plus, plus, plus means all the bits that are not good about Canada. There's no decent mutual recognition agreement. You can lift that out of South Korea or the Australian deal. There's no decent phytosanitary arrangements. You can lift that out of New Zealand. So you go back to them and you say, here we have a proposal constructed entirely of your own precedents. It can't undermine the single market because you negotiated it. It can't undermine the 4 principles because you negotiated it. So that's the attraction of the Canada Plus Plus Plus. That's why it's based on that template. All based on precedents previously negotiated by the Commission. So it is perfectly possible for us to create a draft legal text on the basis of where we are now and put that back to the Union and say the 39 billion rides on this. You have to agree the substantive elements before we sign off, and then you have to agree the detail elements by the end of 2019. Plenty of time to do that on the basis of an existing boilerplate text. That's what we should be doing. We should stop grovelling to Europe and start grasping our future.
We have elections every 5 years. We have referenda very, very rarely. The last time we had a referendum, remember, on this subject was back in 1975, when we had the Scottish referendum. Even Alex Salmond said this is a once-in-a-generation decision. What's going on here is that people who don't like the first answer want the question to be put again. That's what's being done.
Why do you assume that?
No, let me finish.
Why do you assume that?
Because I've just been listening to the argument. I mean, people are, they weren't well informed. Now they know the facts.
There wasn't a deal, David, 2 years ago. They had all of the lies that you've been telling for the past years before they actually went back to the voting.
And I hear what is masquerading as a fact. We've got lower growth than we would have had otherwise. Actually, the Treasury forecast and the Bank of England forecast
They're not forecasts.
We'd lose hundreds of thousands of jobs, that we'd have negative growth in the last 2 years. That's even after the referendum. What's happened? We've got the highest employment ever, the lowest unemployment in my life. If you want to undermine the negotiation, have a second referendum. Why? Because all 27 other countries would rather we didn't leave. And if we have another referendum, they give us the worst possible deal, worse than what we've seen so far, the worst possible deal in order to persuade people to stay.
Mr. David Davis.
Mr. Speaker, I agree entirely with the excellent speeches of my honourable and gallant friend, the member for Billericay, Basil and Billericay, and the chairman of the Defence Select Committee. Both of them made very eloquent speeches. And I can therefore just focus not on the high principle, but on the practicalities of this. And I'll start from the Prime Minister's point at the beginning when he said all members of this House on all sides want to see the end of ISIS. Therefore, we are not talking about the aim, we're simply talking about the practical method of going about it. And the House, I think, all the House can agree with 90% of the motion in front of us. The contentious part is solely the issue of bombing, of whether or not we should engage in the bombing. Now, what's being proposed is entirely understandable. for symbolic, and that's not a small word, for important symbolic reasons, to add a small number of British fast jets to the American-led air campaign in Syria and Iraq. But I think we should just face some facts. That air campaign has so far amounted in both countries to about 10,000 sorties, a third in Syria, against 16,000 targets. The avowed aim? To degrade ISIS or Daesh. The outcome? In the period in which the campaign has been operating, the recruitment for Daesh has doubled, from 15,000 to 30,000 personnel, and by a macabre coincidence, one extra recruit for every target we destroyed. So, from that point of view, it is not achieving the aim intended. It's doing some good things. The radical lady, the ex-Foreign Secretary, is not here, but she talked about Kobane. It's pinning them down from time to time. But it's not achieving what we intended. Indeed, arguably, it's achieving the opposite. Last week, the greatest modern warrior, the ex-Special Forces, American Special Forces Commander, General Stanley McChrystal, was in the House. And I spoke to him, and one of the things he said, in terms, was, and he was talking about drones principally, aerial warfare. He said, never believe in this sort of war you can cut off the head of the snake. It always regenerates. It always reorganises. It's the wrong metaphor for this sort of warfare. So this doesn't work on any level. The other point that leaps out to me is that it's debatable, and I've heard arguments from knowledgeable colleagues, it's debatable whether, no matter how skillful and how brave our pilots will be, and they will be both, no matter how skillful and brave they are, it's debatable whether they'll make any difference at all, not even a marginal difference. And the reason is that there are a large number of aircraft available, of all sorts of weapon systems, including Brimstone, including things that compete and may be better than Brimstone, but they're all there. Not in this moment, in a second. They're all there. What is the constraint? What is the constraint is not the weapon system, it's targets. The Americans in Syria are flying about 7 sorties a day. The Russians, on their declaration, over 140, because the Russians are getting 800 targets a day from the Syrian army. We're getting less than half a dozen, by the sounds of it, from the Free Syrian Army. So if you wanted a practical demonstration of the usefulness in war of the 70,000 that we're told about, you have it there. They're not useful even as target spotters. I give way.
Will he inform the House what his opinion is on the actual bombings in Iraq that are taking place? He's got a very clear view on what we may or may not do in Syria.
I've told him. I've already told him. He can't have been listening. The simple truth is that they have not achieved the aim they were set out to do. They are doing some useful things. They're pinning down some people. But by themselves, they cannot achieve what we have been told is their aim, the reduction and removal of ISIS. And that's the failure. That's the failure. So where do we go from here? Now, I'm not going to go into great elaborate detail about the long-term plan. We've had that from a number of colleagues, and I think all the arguments on that have been made very well. And we know the diplomatic creation of the future Syrian state, the creation of the army on the ground, they're all going to be difficult, and they're not going to be very dramatic. But what we can do immediately, and if people are looking for immediate actions, there are a couple of things we can do pretty much straight away. We can demand, not request, demand of Turkey that it shuts the Turkey-Syria border. ISIS has got $1 billion of income from putting oil across that border, and it sends weapons the other way, and it gives freedom of movement to ISIS. Turkey is a NATO member. It should not be giving any sort of comfort to our enemies. Secondly, Saudi and the Gulf states are supposedly our allies. They send tens of millions of pounds as dollars into these Islamist organisations, not just ISIS, also al-Nusra and the others. The use of this money is essentially to employ soldiers in a country where starvation is always at the door. So that money is incredibly powerful. So if we want to do something straight away, which will do more than several squadrons of aircraft, it's get our allies to do their job. And if I may turn around to the issue that people have raised several times, shouldn't we help the French? Yes, we should help our allies. We should help our allies by destroying ISIS, by doing it properly, not by symbolism.